Hello everyone, I'm Kim Bischoff, the Executive Director of the Neurofibromatosis Network, and we would like to welcome you to our webinar series. These webinars have proven to be an excellent way for the network to reach individuals across the country. Tonight we'll be talking about behavior management for parents harnessing the power of reinforcement. The webinar will be presented by Mary Ballinger, BS, BCBA, COBA, a board-certified behavior analyst with the Knapp Center for Childhood Development. Mary is very passionate about helping others with NF. She has attended and has been an active fundraiser for our Boardman, Ohio Great Steps for NF Walk, and she does this in honor of her son, Luca. After Mary's talk, we'll have some time for questions and answers. To write a question to be read out loud, click on the question box located on the lower portion of the webinar control panel. To remove the webinar control panel from your view of the screen, click on the orange rectangular button with the arrow on the top left portion of the panel. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce you to Mary. Mary, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kim, for inviting me to speak. Tonight we're going to be talking about behavior management strategies for parents. So we're going to go over some tips and techniques to help you in managing problematic behaviors that your children might be displaying at home. Okay, so first I wanted to start off by giving you some information on my background and what it is that I do. I have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis and a national certification in behavior analysis. I work mostly with children and adolescents with various developmental or learning disabilities, and this includes working on teaching new academic or adaptive skills, but also focusing on reducing I also, as a part of my job, work with parents at home, and I teach and coach them on how to manage problematic behaviors that they might have difficulty with at home. I've also presented at national and local conferences on behavior analysis and autism. And like Kim mentioned, I am personally involved in the NF community as I have a 15-month-old son who is diagnosed with NF1, and that's what led me to the NF Network and the opportunity to speak with you all today. So I'm very happy to be here. Okay, so before we get started into the information, I just wanted to give a brief disclaimer that the information you'll be getting tonight is general recommendations and information. And if you do have concerns about challenging behavior that your child might be engaging in, you can seek out a board-certified behavior analyst in your area to help you assist with that. And you can find a behavior analyst at bacv.com, and there's a registry there where you can locate a certified individual. Okay, so let's get started into some basic principles and terms for the day. Okay, so first we're going to start off with what is behavior analysis. This is a question I get asked very often in my job, as many people don't exactly know what it is that we do. So behavior analysis is the scientific study of behavior, and it is a branch of psychology. And one way that behavior analysis is different from other forms of psychology is that we take the approach to behavior that is objective, observable, and measurable. So we use data on behavior, so how often is this behavior occurring, how many times, or duration data, so how long is this behavior occurring, to help determine if our interventions are effective, and it helps us to make treatment decisions. So applied behavior analysis is actually a relatively new branch of psychology when compared to other branches of psychology, and gained popularity in around the 60s or 70s through work with individuals with developmental disabilities. So it's important to note that all of the principles we're going to be talking about today apply to behavior of all individuals. So it could be applied to individuals with or without disabilities who might be displaying challenging behaviors. So behavior analysis focuses on changing behavior by changing the environment in which it occurs. So we believe that all behavior serves a function or a purpose to the person that's behaving. And that's why the behavior continues. It's serving some type of desired outcome for the individual. So it's the job of the behavior analyst to then come in and figure out why is that behavior producing a desired outcome, and then seek to change the environment so that the behavior is no longer functional for the child. Okay. So when we talk about why behavior occurs and what we could do to change behavior, it's important to understand two basic principles. And these are the principles of reinforcement and punishment. So the basic principle of reinforcement states that behavior that produces a desired outcome is likely to be repeated again in the future. And then the basic principle of punishment states that behavior that produces an undesired outcome is likely to not be repeated again in the future. And this is technically called the law of effect. Okay. So a large portion of today's presentation will focus on using positive reinforcement to change behavior. So let's explore reinforcement in more depth. What is positive reinforcement? So positive reinforcement is most often utilized in behavior change programs. And this is the presentation of a desired item, activity, or privilege after behavior occurs, which increases the chance that that behavior is going to occur again in the future. So in simpler terms, positive reinforcement is basically a reward for a desired behavior, so something that we want to see happen again. So examples of positive reinforcement in our lives could include earning a bonus at work for exceptional performance. So the desired item would be the extra money, and this increases our work performance, and so we're more likely to work hard again in the future. Another example would be someone laughing at a joke that we make, and the reinforcer or reward in this case would be social attention from someone laughing at our joke, and the outcome is that a person would be more likely to make jokes in the future. Okay. So another form of reinforcement is called negative reinforcement. So positive and negative in this context don't necessarily refer to good or bad. They basically refer to whether something is presented or whether something is removed. So in negative reinforcement, a person escapes or avoids an undesired situation after a behavior occurs, and it also increases the probability that behavior would occur again in the future. So for example, taking an aspirin if you have a headache. The behavior here is taking aspirin, and then in the future, when you have a headache, you're more likely to take aspirin again because it removed that undesired situation of having a headache. The same would be true for lotion for an itchy skin. So it's an undesired situation. The behavior would be putting on lotion, and the outcome would be that your skin doesn't itch anymore, so you're more likely to do that again in the future. Another example of negative reinforcement would be getting out of work or another non-preferred task. So for example, let's say we have an individual who had very good work performance, and then their boss told them that they could take the day off on Friday. That would be an example of negative reinforcement. So their performance earned them an extra day off, so they got out of a non-preferred task. So that is negative reinforcement. Okay, so I mentioned previously that all behavior serves a function or a purpose for the behavior. So the function can also be equated with why a behavior occurs. So let's look at some reasons why a problem behavior or a challenging behavior might occur. In behavior analysis, there are a few functions of behavior that are recognized to explain why a child might be engaging in an inappropriate or an undesired behavior. So one of these functions could be to get access to something, and this could be a desired item, toy, an activity, an edible item. So an example of behavior maintained by getting access to a desired item could be a child who hits their sibling to get a toy that the sibling is playing with, and then the result is that the child gives up the toy to the child that hit them. So the result of the hitting was getting access to a toy that they wanted. So this would be an example of positive reinforcement, getting access to something. Another function of problematic behavior might be to gain attention or to gain social interaction from others. So an example of an inappropriate behavior maintained by attention Might be a child screaming for their parent while they're busy cooking dinner or on the phone. So I think the situation probably happens a lot. And what happens is the parent stops what they're doing to attend to the child screaming, and that's an example of positive reinforcement in that the child is gaining attention or gaining social interaction is the outcome of the inappropriate behavior. And lastly, we're going to talk about to escape or to avoid something. So like I mentioned, if the child is asked to do their homework and then they throw a tantrum, and then the parent says, okay, fine, we could do it later, then the result of the tantrum behavior is that the child delayed completing their homework. So that would be an example of negative reinforcement. And then the last function of behavior is self-stimulation, and this is termed automatic reinforcement, but is not going to be discussed in our presentation today. So we're going to be focusing on the first three functions. So to get access to something, to gain attention, or to escape or avoid something all might be reasons why a child might be engaging in inappropriate behavior. Okay, so here's just a little visual of what we mean by function. So function means a relationship between the behavior that the child engages in and then the consequence or what they gain from that behavior. So for example, let's say a child has a tantrum in the store at the checkout line because they asked to get a candy bar. And the child is making a scene in the store, so the parent says, okay, fine, just put it on the belt. So the child's behavior produced a desired outcome in that they gained access to the candy bar that they really wanted. And then the outcome of that is that in the future, when the child goes to the store and they would like to get something, they might be more likely to use the inappropriate or tantrum behavior in order to gain access to something. So that's another example of function. Okay, so let's look at these in a little bit more depth. So I mentioned that inappropriate behavior might serve the function of attention. So it could be the attention of someone else. It can be an adult. It can be a peer. So a child might, for example, might make an inappropriate comment in class, and that results in laughter from their peers. So this would be an example of attention-maintained behavior. And I think we can all think of examples of things that our children have done in an attempt to get our attention. It's something that our kids are very good at doing. So it's important to note that attention for behavior can come in many different forms. So it could be a soothing statement. It might be physical contact, such as a pat on the back or a high five or a hug. It might be a reprimand, so telling the child not to do something could actually serve as a form of attention. Laughter or even looking at someone a certain way could serve as a form of attention that might increase that inappropriate behavior again in the future. So with behavior maintained by attention, the child is seeking some type of reaction from someone else when they engage in this inappropriate behavior, which is why in some cases, if a problem behavior is maintained by attention, it might be best to simply ignore the child's behavior. Okay. So some behavior occurs to gain access to some preferred items. So like I mentioned earlier, it might be access to a preferred toy that they want, or a preferred video game, or access to food or another edible item, or a preferred activity. So sometimes children who have inappropriate behaviors that are maintained by trying to gain access to something might have difficulties with transitions or transitioning away from a preferred activity. So when they are told that they need to stop playing their video games and they have to go to the store with mom or dad, that might present difficulty for that child. They might also have difficulty accepting no or dealing with desired items or activities being terminated. So the overall goal then is for that child, their desired outcome might be that engaging in this inappropriate behavior then results in gaining access to something. Okay, and then lastly, we'll talk about escaping or avoiding something. So some behaviors serve the function of escaping or avoiding things that people don't like, and the technical term for this is aversive. So as parents, we do frequently place demands on our children, whether it's to complete homework, to clean up their room, to complete their chores. to complete a daily living skill, like you have to go brush your teeth before bed. So I think we can all think of a time when we placed a demand on our child which might have evoked an inappropriate behavior or an attempt to get out of the behavior or get out of the requested task that we gave the child. And sometimes it is effective because as parents we do give in. We can't always have those strong moments, so at some points we might give in to that child's inappropriate behavior, and then in the future they learn, let me try that again to see if it will work effectively to get out of something that I don't want to do. So that's to escape or avoid something. Okay. So we talked about different types of reinforcement. So now I want to go over how do you use reinforcement to change behavior? How do we use reinforcement to promote appropriate behavior and in turn then reduce these challenging or desired behaviors that the children might be displaying? Okay, so first we're going to talk about verbal praise. So verbal praise is often underutilized. It's actually the easiest and most cost-effective form of positive reinforcement because it's freely and readily available. So there's no monetary cost. We can always be delivering verbal praise. And as parents, we can get caught up in our daily routines and we're very busy and trying to get things completed. And we might not always have time to focus in on the things that our children are doing right. And it might only be simply focusing in on behaviors that are inappropriate or things that we don't want to see. But it's very good to be able to provide that feedback to our child on things that they are doing right. So providing that verbal praise to things that we do want to see. So as a general rule, we should be making 5 praise statements to the child for every instance of corrective feedback. So every time we have to tell them, no, don't do this, no, don't do that, there should always be 5 praise statements accompanied with that one instance of corrective feedback. And I think that's something that is very hard to do, and as a parent, it's something you would have to monitor to say, am I actually looking for these things that my child is doing right, and being able to provide them with the feedback for those appropriate behaviors. And this 5-to-1 is called the magic ratio, and this has been established in research that 5 praise statements to every one instance of corrective feedback is very effective at increasing appropriate behavior. So when we deliver verbal praise, we want to be focusing on specific behaviors and not ever equating a child's behavior with the child. So our child is not ever, oh, you were very good today, or you were very bad today. So we're not equating the child's behavior with the child. We're focusing on the specific behavior that the child engaged in. So for example, I really like how you cleaned up your toys the first time I asked. You can have ice cream tonight. So that would be a good example of verbal praise. And a bad example would be, because you were so good today, you can have ice cream tonight. So that doesn't give any specific feedback to the child on what they did right. So we always want to be giving them that specific feedback on the behavior we do want to see. Okay. So again, we want to provide that specific description to the child on what behavior they did that was right. And then we're more likely to see that behavior occur again in the future. So labeling what the child did increases the chance that the child will learn, and that it will increase in future similar situations. So for example, when I told you your break was over, I love how you said okay and cleaned up your toys. So in that example, it's specifically what the child did that we want to see again. Versus after the child cleans up their toys, we say thank you. This doesn't build on the specific behavior that we want to see again in the future. So again, making sure that every instance of verbal praise or feedback we give to the child is specific. Okay. So to go along with the verbal praise, we also want to be utilizing other positive consequences or rewards. So we talked about positive reinforcement. Again, this is a good time to utilize it. So we want to pair our verbal praise with some desired outcome for the child so that the behavior will increase again in the future. So, for example, we might give the child access to their favorite game or extra free time or additional tokens or candy or toys. So all of these things can be paired with verbal praise so that we're more likely to see that behavior happen again in the future. And one thing you want to do is when you first see the child engage in that appropriate behavior that you typically don't see, you do want to pair it with a reward. So verbal praise plus reward. And then once that behavior starts to increase and you're seeing it happening more and more often, then we can start to fade out the other reward, and they're simply only earning the verbal praise, and that's effective at sustaining that behavior. So for example, for doing such a great job finishing your homework, you can have an extra 5 minutes of iPad. So we have the verbal praise that's specific, and we also have a positive consequence for engaging in that behavior. All rewards that we're giving to our child should be individualized and unique to the child. So as a parent, you know what will motivate your child. So you know what will work effectively as a reward. So is it going to get ice cream that night? Is it extra time playing a game? So you know your child best, and you know what they would be willing to change their behavior for. When we talk about size of a reward or size of a reinforcer, we want to make sure that it's enough to maintain the behavior, but not too much or too little. So this is kind of a trial and error type of procedure. So we want to make sure that we're giving them enough in that the behavior will continue to occur. And we also want to make sure that we're not giving them too little, that they're not motivated enough to engage in that appropriate behavior or what we want to see. Okay, so one way to fade the use of reward, so we talked about pairing the verbal praise with a positive consequence, but a lot of parents will say it's not feasible for me to always be giving my child a reward for doing things that I want them to be doing. And that's a valid claim. So how do we fade out these positive consequences and still see these appropriate behaviors occurring? So one way to do that is through the use of a token system or a point system. And these are systems that are used to increase behavior, and they're based off of positive reinforcement. So let's look at what is a token system. So a token system is a behavior management system in which children can earn tokens or points for a desired behavior that can later be exchanged for other desired items or privileges. So the tokens can serve to reinforce the desired behavior in the moment while teaching the child to tolerate that delay between the time they engaged in that appropriate behavior that we wanted to see and the time that they get access to this other reward. So for example, the child cleaned up their toys. We could say, oh, I love how you cleaned up your toys. Here's a point, here's a token. So we use that token to reinforce that desired behavior in the moment, and then maybe the child has to earn 5 different tokens before they gain access to that positive reward later on. So we start working on teaching a delay between the time that you engaged in this behavior and the time that you get access to that positive outcome. And point and token systems are frequently used in academic settings to maintain appropriate behavior, and they can also be used at home very effectively to promote desired behaviors. So how do we implement a token economy or a token system? So the first thing we need to do is specify what behaviors we would like to increase. So we need to be sure that the child is aware of what behaviors they can do in order to earn tokens. So it's best to post these behaviors so that the child can refer to them in either written or visual form, depending on if your child can read. So if your child can read, posting a list of rules or behaviors that they can do to earn them tokens. If your child is not reading yet, maybe it's posting pictures of things that they can do in order to earn tokens. The second step in order to implement a token economy is to determine what will the tokens be. Is the child earning a sticker? Is it a star? Is it a poker chip? Now the token can basically be anything. So you can kind of think of the token as money. So for us, money would be basically meaningless if we couldn't use it to purchase other desired things. So just like money, the tokens themselves are not worth anything unless they can be exchanged for some other desired item that the child wants. And it can be beneficial to use the child's interests in order to create the token. So say your child has a favorite TV show, you might make each of their tokens a character from that TV show in order to build that motivation and interest in earning the tokens. Third, we want to establish a backup reinforcer. So once the child earns all of their tokens, what are they going to be able to exchange the tokens for? So is it extra free time? Is it candy? So what are they going to earn once they gain all their tokens and are able to exchange them for something else, so for that desired reward? Fourth, we want to establish a reinforcement schedule. So how often are the tokens delivered? Every time we see appropriate behavior, are they given a token? Maybe every 3 times we see the appropriate behavior, they're given a token. So we would have to establish as parents, how often are they able to earn tokens? And that would be the reinforcement schedule. For number 5, we need an exchange criterion. So that's just how many tokens does the child need in order to get access to a desired reward. Number 6 would be the time and place for the exchange. So when are they able to exchange those tokens in for that backup reward? And then lastly, this is something that can or cannot be a part of a token economy, but this is something called response cost. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit further towards the end of the presentation. But response cost is a penalty or a fine for engaging in inappropriate behavior. And in this instance, the token would be taken away. So they're earning tokens for appropriate behavior, but when you see an inappropriate behavior occur, 1 token might be removed as a penalty for engaging in inappropriate behavior. And it's always recommended to start off with simply just earning tokens for desired behavior and not including a response cost until you start your token system. And then if you find that it's necessary, at that point, I would implement it later on after you try simply just earning tokens for positive behavior first. Okay, so here's an example of a point system. So you can see this is a very simple token economy, and the child can earn points to gain access to various rewards such as candy or computer or break time. And it's outlined how many points are needed to earn each of these things. Here's another example of a point system, and I really like this one because, again, it has the specific behaviors that the child should be engaging in clearly posted. So it tells them what they need to do and how many points they would need to get in order to earn various things. And again, these token economies or point systems can be individualized to your household and what's going to work best for your child. And here's an example of a very simple token economy. So this might be used for a beginner or a young child. And token economies are often used, again, to promote academic or homework behaviors at home. So you can use this if you're struggling to get your child to complete their homework. As they're completing it, they might earn various tokens and then are able to exchange it for a desired item or to take a break from the table and then come back and finish up their homework. So having that motivation to complete it, because sometimes they might have 3 different assignments and it might be very difficult to get them through all of them. So using a token system like this can build that motivation in order to complete all of the work that they need to complete. Okay. So next we'll talk about some tips for implementing a token or point system. So one thing you want to do is be very specific, again, about what behaviors can earn tokens and make sure that the child knows what those behaviors are. You want to make sure you deliver your tokens as soon as the behavior occurs. So we'll talk about reinforcement more, but it is most effective if the reinforcer or the reward closely follows the desired behavior. So as soon as we see that child doing something right, we want to say, great job doing X, Y, or Z, and deliver that token immediately. We want to tell the child, again, what they did to earn the token, and then ensure that the child can reach the response requirement and then gradually increase that requirement. So for example, say the child needs to earn 10 tokens before they get access to a reward that they're looking forward to working for. But the child is really struggling in order to get all 10 tokens because their behavior is just not there yet. So they're not displaying this appropriate behavior enough times in order to reach those 10 tokens and then gain their reward. So if the response requirement is too high, the child will probably lose motivation to engage in those appropriate behaviors and likely give up because it's just too hard. So we want to set them up for success by starting off with limited number of tokens. So maybe they only have to earn 3 and then they gain access to the reward. And then we have them earn 4 and they gain access to the reward. And then gradually increasing and then fading out the access to that tangible item. Okay, so let's go over some rules for reinforcement. So how can we use reinforcement effectively? It's a very powerful tool if it's used correctly. So how can we do this in order to maintain appropriate behaviors in our children? So one way to utilize reinforcement effectively is to, again, ensure that it's immediate. We want it to be ideally 1 to 3 seconds after the behavior occurs. And the reason for this is we're building a connection between what you did right and the positive outcome. So in the beginning, the closer it is between the appropriate behavior and the positive outcome, the more likely we are to see that behavior occur again in a similar situation. Once the child gets older and then understands rules, delayed reinforcement might also be effective. So we'll talk about delayed reinforcement a little bit as well. Again, we want to be descriptive, so this is a common theme. We want to tell the child exactly what they did that was right. And then again, discovering what motivates your child. So what works for one child might not work for another child. So we want to make sure that it is individualized to our child. What is going to motivate them to change their behavior? Okay, one thing I wanted to touch on was rewards versus bribery. This is a question I'm posed frequently from parents that I work with. So they ask me, isn't giving the child a reward just bribing them to do something? So there is a difference between bribery versus reinforcement. So what is that? So bribery is an if-then relationship. So the example would be, I will let you have extra computer time if you clean up your room. So this is an if-then relationship. So the difference is that the behavior, the reward is happening before the behavior occurs. Versus in reinforcement, we have a first-then relationship. So the behavior occurs, and then they gain access to the reward. So first you clean up your room, and then you can have extra computer time. So the difference is that the behavior occurs, and then the positive outcome occurs. In bribery, the individual might gain access to that preferred item and then are expected, because they got access to that, to then engage in that appropriate requested behavior. So that's the main difference between rewards versus bribery. So we always want to be focusing on the behavior occurred first, and then they gain access to the positive outcome. So we're not giving them something first and then expecting them to engage in an appropriate behavior after they already got access to the desired item. Okay, some additional rules for reinforcement is that we do not want to remind the child of a reinforcer they would be getting if they weren't engaging in disruptive behavior. So for example, we don't want to say, well, we could have gone to the movies if you would have gotten along with your sister. So we're not going to be reminding the child of something they could have earned if they were engaging in appropriate behavior. We also don't want to offer additional rewards when a child is engaging in a problematic behavior in an attempt to calm them down. So for example, if our child's in the middle of a tantrum, we don't want to say, well, if you calm down, we can go get ice cream. So this might be an example of bribery in the case that we're trying to use something in order to get the behavior to stop occurring. And if we were to do that, so we say, if you calm down, we can go get ice cream, we might actually be teaching the child that by engaging in this inappropriate behavior, it produced you a desired outcome. And that's something that we don't want to do. We don't ever want our child to realize that inappropriate behavior can get me something desired. Okay. So I had mentioned earlier delayed consequences. And so for young children or for early learners, we want to have reinforcement or rewards be immediate. So as soon as we see that desired behavior, we want to be providing access to that positive outcome. So they're starting to pair the relationship between their behavior and the positive outcome. So a cause and effect relationship. With older children, they are able to often come up with that cause and effect relationship, or my behavior produced this positive outcome. So you might be able to use delayed consequences with older children. So for example, because you cleaned up your room today, you can hang out with your friends on the weekend. So that would be an example of a delayed consequence, and they might be able to connect the appropriate behavior that they did and how that is earning them a positive outcome later. For younger children, they might not be able to make that same cause-effect relationship that their behavior produced this outcome if it's too far delayed. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Okay. And lastly, we're going to be talking about punishment techniques. So this is another topic that I frequently get questions on. So we'll talk a little bit about punishment and how to use it best and when it should be used. So just like we talked about positive and negative reinforcement, we're going to talk about positive and negative punishment. And they're similar with the difference that punishment decreases the chance that the behavior will occur again in the future. So in positive punishment, we're adding something that the child doesn't like in an attempt to decrease that behavior in the future. So for example, the child called their sibling a name, and now they have to complete extra chores. So we added something that they don't like in order to decrease the chance of that behavior happening again. In negative punishment, the child might lose a preferred item or a privilege after a behavior occurs that again decreases the chance of that behavior occurring again in the future. So for example, our child called their sibling a name, and then the child loses access to their video game. So something is taken away that they like that will then decrease the chance of that behavior happening again in the future. Okay. So next we're going to talk about timeout. So timeout is a behavior management strategy that I find that a lot of parents already use and that's often used in schools. And so I get a lot of questions on timeout. So the full name for timeout is technically timeout from positive reinforcement, meaning because the child engaged in an inappropriate behavior, they are losing access or losing the opportunity to earn positive reinforcement, meaning attention, access to desired items or activities that other children or other peers might be able to engage in. So they lose access to positive reinforcement for a specific time period because of the problem behavior that they engaged in. And so there are various different types of timeout, two of these being non-exclusionary and exclusionary. And these basically mean in non-exclusionary timeout, the individual or the child is still within their environment. So for example, let's take the classroom. And the child is still within the classroom, but they're sent to the back of the classroom. And they are sitting and watching all of the other children participate in activities, but they themselves have lost access to engaging in those activities and earning rewards. So they're still within their environment in a non-exclusionary timeout. In an exclusionary timeout, the individual is completely removed from the time-in environment. So they might be, for example, be placed in their room at home. So they engaged in inappropriate behavior, and now they are sent to their room. That would be an example of an exclusionary timeout. And lastly, another type of timeout is called planned ignoring. And this is basically the child stays within their environment, but everyone is basically ignoring the child. So all of these types of timeout work best for inappropriate behavior that is maintained by attention. So this is when it comes back to the why. Why is this problem behavior occurring? And this is why it's important to figure out the why. So for example, let's say our child engages in a tantrum every time they're presented with their homework. And we are implementing a timeout procedure because of this inappropriate behavior. So they're presented with their homework assignment, they're screaming, kicking, crying, they don't want to complete the assignment, so we send them to their room for a timeout. Now the outcome that the kicking and screaming and the tantrum produced is that the child actually got to delay completion of the homework. So that seems functional. I engaged in this behavior and now I got out of what I didn't want to do. So that's something important to keep in mind if you're interested in possibly running a timeout with your child at home, is are they trying to escape or avoid something that you're giving them to do? So is it homework? Is it cleaning up their room? Is it a chore? So is the child trying to get out of something? And if so, timeout is probably not the best technique to utilize. Because it actually is producing that desired outcome. So in those instances, parents are likely to come to me and say, we're implementing timeout and it's just not working. I don't know what's going on, it's not working. So my first question to them would be, what did you do? What happened right before the problem behavior occurred? And so they tell me, okay, we gave them their homework assignment. And so that can be an indicator that the child might have been trying to escape that homework assignment. And what we're doing is actually producing the desired outcome that they're looking for. So that's one word of caution to keep in mind if you're interested in implementing a timeout, is the child trying to get out of something? On the other hand, if the child is trying to get your attention by engaging in this inappropriate behavior, timeout will work very well. So we're actually cutting off attention when the child is placed in timeout. So their inappropriate behavior does not lead to attention, and then it's less likely to occur again in the future. So a timeout would work best for behavior that is maintained by attention. One thing I wanted to mention on timeout is the length of time that a child is in timeout. So research tells us that actually a longer timeout does not produce more benefits than a shorter timeout. So it's not necessarily that the longer that a child is in timeout, the more effective the timeout is. Research has shown that shorter timeouts can be just as effective as longer timeouts. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And as a general rule, we typically say that a timeout should be the length of the child's chronological age. So a 3-year-old might be in a timeout for 3 minutes versus a 6-year-old might be in timeout for 6 minutes. So again, the longer the timeout doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be more effective. Okay, and I mentioned response costs briefly earlier. So again, this is just the loss of a reward after an undesired behavior occurs. And then it'll decrease the chance that that behavior occurs again in the future. So a child hits their sibling and they lose TV time for the night. So they're basically losing access to something that they want or something that they would typically be engaging in because of the inappropriate behavior, and it'll decrease that behavior in the future. So for example, if we're implementing a token economy and the child engages in inappropriate behavior, they might lose tokens. So one word of caution if you're interested in implementing a response cost is that be careful about what you're taking away. So if the child loses access to all of their desired items or activities without an opportunity to earn them back, they might again lose motivation to engage in any appropriate behavior. They might be thinking, why does it matter? So if everything is taken away and they can't earn it back, there's really no motivation to then at that point engage in an appropriate behavior. So I would always recommend that if we're using a response cost, the child does have an opportunity to then earn the item back by engaging in appropriate behavior. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about why reinforcement might be preferred as an intervention method over punishment. So the main reason why reinforcement is preferred is that it teaches a desired behavior. So they're getting a positive outcome after they do something appropriate. So we are increasing desired behavior. We're teaching them what is desired. And again, with that specific verbal praise, we're teaching them what's desired. It focuses the attention towards the desired behavior. So we're catching the child being good. It kind of keeps us as parents focused on what the child is doing right. There are some disadvantages of implementing punishment. So there are side effects to punishment. These could be aggressive or emotional reactions. So we have a child who's engaged in inappropriate behavior. We take their video games away. We're likely going to get some aggressive or emotional reaction because that video game was taken away. There might be escape or avoidance behavior. So the child might avoid the punisher or the person implementing the punishment. There also might be examples of modeling or imitation. So the child might imitate punishment. So for example, say that we take the child's toys away at home for engaging in inappropriate behavior, and then the child goes to school and takes toys off of a peer and is not sharing appropriately. So they can model or imitate the use of punishment. So these are all negative side effects of implementing a punishment procedure, which is why, as a behavior analyst, we will always recommend utilizing a reinforcement-based procedure first, and then if that is not effective, then implementing an additional punishment procedure as well. But again, the advantages are that we're teaching the desired behavior and we're catching the child being good. Okay. And lastly, I wanted to touch on the importance of consistency. So this is vital to any behavior management strategy that you want to use, is that you must remain consistent. So whether you're utilizing reinforcement-based procedure or you're utilizing a punishment-based procedure, you must be consistent with your implementation of it. So what do I mean by that? One thing I wanted to describe to you is something called intermittent reinforcement or punishment. And in intermittent reinforcement or punishment, the consequence for the behavior doesn't occur each time the behavior occurs. So let's look at a real-life example of intermittent punishment. So we likely don't get a speeding ticket each time we're speeding. So what effect does that have on our driving behavior? So if we were to go out and we were driving down the road and every time we went over the speed limit, we were pulled over and we got a speeding ticket, our speeding behavior would likely decrease pretty quickly. But we don't get a speeding ticket every time we go over the speed limit. So that's an example of intermittent punishment. And the effect is that it doesn't really change our behavior. So for example, if every other time the child engaged in inappropriate behavior, they were put in timeout, it's likely not going to be effective because the child is kind of playing their odds. What are the chances that I will gain punishment for engaging in this behavior? And that's when you would see that your intervention technique is likely not going to be effective. So we don't want them to be playing the odds. We want them to know that every time you do this, there will be a consequence that follows. So I encourage you at home to be very consistent with any type of behavior management strategies that you want to utilize. And you're more likely to be successful when the child learns that each instance of this behavior produces the same outcome. Okay, so in conclusion, inappropriate behavior can be functional or can produce a desired outcome for the child. So that's something just to keep in mind. Positive reinforcement or rewards can be very effective at increasing desired behavior. And some ways you can utilize positive rewards can be to be verbal praise, or a token system can be a form of positive reinforcement that can be used at home. Other behavior management techniques such as timeout or response cost can also be very effective at reducing problem behavior, but they are more restrictive and you do have to watch out for some potential negative side effects of implementing those procedures. So reinforcement is preferred over punishment because it teaches an alternative desired behavior. And again, it's very important to remain consistent with any behavior management strategy that you're choosing to use so that there is a constant consequence associated with both appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Okay, so that's all that I have for today. So I will be taking questions if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, for an excellent presentation tonight in great details. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that everybody knows that this is being recorded. Because we had so many good details here tonight, if you would like to review this presentation, it'll be on the NF Network website in just a couple of days. We'll probably have it up on the home page here very shortly. If you still have more questions that you'd like to ask, again, it's in that question box. You can go ahead and type your questions down in there, and then I'll read them to Mary for you. Or you can click on a hand button, and then I can unmute your speaker, and you can ask a question. I see that Crystal has her hand up there. It looks like she has a question, so I'm going to unmute you, Crystal. Crystal, can you hear me there? Go ahead and talk, and let me see if you can come through.
Actually, that was an accident.
Oh, well, at least we know it worked. And it worked. Well, thank you for attending tonight, Crystal.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So at this particular point, I don't have any questions listed here right now, Mary, but there's be a survey that comes up right after this webinar. And if you still have questions, attendees, and you would like to type them in on the questionnaire, Mary has volunteered to take your questions. I will get them to her, and then she will go ahead and answer them for you. So I'd just really like to thank Mary for attending tonight, and thank our generous donors who make these webinars possible. They've really proven to be an excellent way to improve the quality of life of individuals through NF. The NF Network has a major goal of educating our families. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, Mary, and for everybody who was attending, and wish everybody a nice evening. Thanks again, Mary.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.